Where did you start jiu-jitsu? You were in UCLA, and when?
Yeah. So
where
this
did you
was
start?
this was '97. So I was out of law school, and after I watched the first UFC. Actually, after I watched the first UFC, I was intrigued, but I was perplexed. I think, like a lot of people, we saw what we saw, right? We saw this skinny, 178, 180-pound guy beat all
Normal
these,
guy, right? Beating this
exactly.
steroidal, juiced out.
But we didn't know why that happened. Unless I know you had an earlier start in jiu-jitsu, but for the majority of the interested population, even folks with some kind of a martial art self-defense background, they didn't know why that happened. And then I think with UFC 2, I think 4, et cetera, we started appreciating a little bit more of how he was able to do what he did.
No gloves, no time limits.
Right.
No weights, right?
That's right. I think the
Three
only
fights in one night.
I think the only rules were no eye gouging and no like biting.
Sorry, was there? I thought there was no groin strikes.
No,
but then
you
had
could
that,
do groin
you had
strikes.
that. What's his name? Forgot the chemo's coach, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that was considered a KO or a submission of sorts. Yeah. So for a couple of years after the first UFC, I walked around interested in it, but I didn't know where to get jiu-jitsu instruction. Right. I think I might have heard that there was the Gracie Academy in Torrance, but I didn't go to sign up there. And I think also the impression at the time was, they called it Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, right? So the art was really for the family and those that represented the family. And I didn't think that it was something that was widely available to people that were interested. And then I met a guy, a friend of a friend, who was training under Hickson.
Okay.
And he's a guy who was a successful high school wrestler. And I think he was an experienced white belt at some point when I started learning from him. He got his blue belt from Hickson. So it was, I think some people refer to it as backyard training. But he
Cross training, backyard, yeah.
Yeah, he got a group of guys together, and he would learn a few moves at Hickson School and come and teach us one or two moves. So I trained with him for, I don't know, a year and a half. And you know who was in that group was the UFC referee, Herb Dean.
Herb Dean.
Yeah,
wow.
That's when I met Herb. Yeah. And then after doing that for a little bit, I joined the Machado School in Torrance, Redondo Beach. And that's where I got my blue belt from Hegan.
Hegan,
Yeah. And I actually got every belt from a different instructor. It just worked out that way. So I trained with Hegan in Torrance. And then Hodger Machado opened his school in Pasadena, and that was closer to where I was living. So I went with Hodger, and Hodger gave me my purple belt.
You used to train with Joey. Joey was around.
That's when I met, Professor Joey. I like to tell the story of how, at the time he knew 5 moves and I knew 3. And so we didn't really know enough to easily submit each other, so we would just roll for like 40 minutes straight. Good guy. And then I left Hodger School as a purple belt and went to Van der Braga School. And that was when he had the school in Montrose. I think it was called Fight Forum.
Fight Forum, yeah.
Yeah. And I trained with Vander and his friend Alexandre Novaes. They both were black belts under George Pereira, who's a Hickson Gracie
lineage, yeah.
Yeah. And so they were teaching together. Vander gave me my brown belt, and I thought I was going to eventually get my black belt from Vander, but I think you know the story. Vander had some issues.
Immigration issues coming back to the country.
Yeah, I think he took his family back to Brazil on vacation or something, and then wasn't able to
Come back.
come back. So Alexander took over, and then shortly after that, he opened his own school in Sunland. So I stayed with Alexander and got my black belt from Alexander in 2010. Yeah, that was 13 years after I was first introduced to Jiu-Jitsu.